Hello, friends. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm your host, Zen Garcia.
Welcome, friends, readers, listeners, and viewers from across America and around the world. I am your host, Zen Garcia. This is Secrets Revealed here on Truth Frequency Radio, and I appreciate all of you taking the time to join us this evening. I have a special guest with me, Andy Hoy from Project 314. Andy, are you there, brother?
Yes, I am. Good to be here, Zen.
How you been, man? I know you've been quite busy doing a lot of updates and a lot of projects in regard to the research and your discovery on the shape of the Moshe's Wilderness Tabernacle. And so for people that may not be familiar with you or know about your work, can you describe what it is you discovered several years back and what you've been working on, and then, of course, your website and contact and that information?
Sure, yeah. In a nutshell, I discovered that the Exodus Tabernacle was not this square rectangular shoebox shape or A-frame or what have you. For the most part, they're always depicted with rectangular courtyards and everything. This is the traditional model as it's been perceived for 2,000 years. But I, by a kind of course of accident, discovered that the structure itself is actually round, and I found that by happening upon the pi constant in the plain text of Exodus. It talks about 11 curtains that are used that are all joined together edge to edge or end to end, and traditionally they've been joining together with the wrong edges. And when they're put together with the proper edges, the sum of the perimeter that's created by them is 314. So the ancients knew pi to the to 2 decimal points basically. So that kind of gave way to the discovery of the tabernacle actually being shaped like a dome. And basically, I founded Project 314 to further research, basically in a nutshell, research and restoration is what Project 314 is all about. So between researching more of the details of it, as well as restoring this to public knowledge and community of believers.
Recent.
I was going to say, yeah, project314.org is the name of my website for those who haven't seen it.
Excellent. And you said you've been working on some books and other projects, posters, images, things of that nature. And so can you talk a little bit about that as well?
Sure. Well, I guess I go back. I'll maybe start with the website. So the website was first released in actually on Pi Day of 2015. So that was actually 31415, March 14th of 2015 is when I originally released the website. And that it generated some interest and everything, but it didn't give kind of a bigger or much of the bigger, fuller picture and vision of everything. And that's before I had the book. I basically had a few engineering style drawings out at that time as products. So if people wanted to really dig into the research, they could get those. But since then, basically last year, I released my first book on the topic, and that's called The House of El Shaddai. And I think that's I released that after the first show we did. I didn't have that book out yet. So I basically have finished that. That is on the market. I've got also on the market a workbook, which is like a 200 question series designed to help the reader discover it for themselves. Where my first book has got like 200 some pictures, and it's over 200 pages color. Whereas my workbook is just it's 200 questions, and it doesn't give you all the pictures, and so it kind of encourages you as a reader, as a student, or in studying it. This is kind of very, very Jewish in that sense, where they're always asking the question, well, why is this and why is that? So this is that's kind of the nature of that book is more of a schooling thing, or for a Bible study group or Sunday school group, whatever. And then I have a PowerPoint as well, which is also based on the book The House of El Shaddai, which allows someone who doesn't really know anything about the tabernacle to be able to present again to a small group or obviously a big group, or could be used in a school curriculum or good homeschool tool. And that PowerPoint, if you buy that, that's a CD-ROM, and that basically includes the workbook as well. So that's kind of it's a 3-product package, more or less, between the CD-ROM, the workbook, and the primary book. And the primary book is either in hardcover or softcover, available on Amazon and on my website as well. So that's kind of that project is kind of one thing unto itself. And then I started on another book project as well, or actually 2 of them. But so the one is drafted. It's entitled Exploring God's House, and that's basically getting into the Hebrew side of things more. So my first book really doesn't expect any Hebrew familiarity from an audience member, and the second one is kind of stepping it up. It's made for people who are looking, to get into some of the nuts and bolts of the language, because let's be honest, what I'm claiming is a pretty extraordinary thing. Saying, hey, everyone's been wrong about this in translation, in tradition for, say, a couple thousand years, and so to come along without having all my I's dotted and my T's crossed, so to speak, that in and of itself is a problem. And I get a lot of blowback from time to time about, oh, my Bible says this, my King James says this or that. And I'm like, well, that's all well and good, but your King James isn't inspired scripture. It's the Hebrew that was the divinely inspired. So, so this next work is designed for that, and I'm working on trying to get that to an Israeli audience. I have a Jewish contact I'm working with, or a couple of them actually, and I'm working on trying to get that so the content it suits a Jewish audience. Use of the name and things like that. They're very sensitive. Whereas my first book is entitled The House of El Shaddai, and so for those who don't know, Shaddai is one of the names of God. El Shaddai is usually translated as God Almighty. But the interesting thing with Shaddai, it's Shin Dalet Yud, and if you look at that from a gematria standpoint, the Shin is where 300. So this is where gematria, where a number is equal to a letter. I'm sure most of your audience is already familiar with that. But so like A is 1, B is 2, C is 3. So basically the Shin is equal to 300, the Dalet is 4, and the Yud is 10. And so the word Shaddai is actually 314.
That is amazing.
Yeah, literally, El Shaddai is the God of pie.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's amazing.
And so Jews actually put those, the mezuzah on their door with the Shin Dalet Yud. So this is something within Judaism. They're very familiar with Shaddai is a word, but this is something that a lot of times they'll even put like G-D. They won't use the tetragrammaton,
right.
And they'll go so far as to like say G-D, and instead of saying Elohim, they'll say Elohim. So I'm trying to make something that kind of meets kind of expectations of a Jewish reader. But this interlinear version that I have right now is also, as it's written, it's good. It's more or less designed for an American reader, and more or less an American Hebrew roots type person, or people in seminary. So I've got that book on, that project is in one phase or another, I guess, as well.
That's awesome. That's awesome, brother, that you're staying busy. And I will say that the book that you made on the House of El Shaddai is absolutely beautiful and stunning and very well made, and I definitely recommend people check it out, especially if they have interest in this particular topic. And I know that you have tried to distance yourself just from, with regard to biblical cosmology because of the controversy that surrounds that whole particular topic, but certainly your work seems to have come about as a confirming witness to, the discoveries that even myself and Rob have made in regard to this particular issue, and how the cosmology is a perfect representation of what you've discovered with regard to the shape of the tabernacle, and Moshe's the wilderness tabernacle being in the shape of a dome, which, the cosmology being covered over is in the shape of a tent, according to Isaiah, that the earth being the foundation, and then the heavens spread above like a curtain, that it represents in similarity what you have discovered. And so, it's definitely, I believe, a confirming witness to this revelation coming forth at this time, and that so many people have been embracing this ideology. And so definitely, for those that are interested in biblical cosmology, definitely you should check out Andy's work, and you can find his material at Project 314, and I do believe we have it at Sacred Word Publishing as well. But I want to share with you a recent passage that I read, and I believe that this was put forth by Ezra in the Legends of the Jews. It's just a small passage that says, "With his word he created the firmament, which he stretched out like a cloud in the air. He cast it over the world like a dark vault, like a tent. It is spread over the earth. And in his strength he upholds all there is above and below. The sun, the moon, and the Pleiades run before him. The stars and the planets are not idle for a single moment. They rest not, they speed before him as his messengers, going to the right and to the left, to do the will of him who created them. To him praise is due. Before him we must prostrate ourselves." And so, what do you think about that, as far as, the firmament and the tent, and its regard to as far as, the tabernacle?
Well, there's, I guess let me just start by reiterating the idea that I brought forth last time when we were kind of touching on some of the cosmology. If you look at the book of Hebrews, it mentions the idea, that the kind of the types and shadows, that the priests serve in this thing, represent something of the heavens, and just the idea of he stretches out the heavens like a tent. Mm-hmm. There's that language as well, of course. And I'll say this, regardless of cosmological worldview, this dome fits either system 100% better than what it was. Mm-hmm. I'd also, I have standing concerns that this is between the project and the discovery and the significance of all this, that it's limited to a cosmological apologetic. And I know that, those within, who are really digging into biblical cosmology these days, the bells are ringing, and people are being very excited about that. And I actually would like to create and publish work on cosmological correlations, the tabernacle type thing. But right now, I think I have a bigger challenge and bigger hurdle, and that is getting this accepted in the world of Peshat. Right. When I say Peshat, it's the plain text, and this is what to me is so, I guess, what's the word for it? Between frustrating and I'm bewildered by the idea that 2015 is when I had launched the website. So I'm literally it's a 5-year anniversary time right now for the project. If I can scarcely believe that if I think about it. It's like, where did all the 5 years go? Or what have I been doing? Mm-hmm. And it's not so much what have I been doing, but what have people been doing as a result of this, when I say this discovery and everything, there have been very few who've really said, a combination of A, this is interesting, and B, this is important. And the fact that people don't recognize the importance of this, I think, is so detrimental to the religious community, and to limit this in the context of cosmology is also kind of equally concerning. You were talking about some of the other book projects. Well, I started writing a book on. So I was just as I've got this series of the House of El Shaddai, and the House of El Shaddai is designed to help wean people off of the shoebox model. I mean, you've seen, I've got a lot of graphics in there. I'm saying this is what they are representing and distorting, and I'm saying no, this hardware is going here and it's shaped like that and it functions like this according to Exodus Hebrew. I do that time and time and time again. And here's the problem with the whole knowledge base of the religious community. If they don't understand the Peshat, how are they going to understand typology? People look at Christology, or there's another. It was I forget the other word for it, epistemology or something like that. But anyway, they've been basically comparing Messiah to a shoebox for centuries. And I'm sorry, but the box correlation simply does not work. It doesn't work in a lot of levels. Now, if you look at the idea that man is created in the image of God, and you've also got who's the architect of the tabernacle? The guy's name is Bezalel. Well, Bezalel is Hebrew for onion. Batzal-el is literally God's onion. And so this is God's onion. This is like an onion. It's cropping up out of the ground. And not only that, like an onion, it's translucent in a sense, in that, this is all about light and letting, light into the center, as opposed to making this big closet of darkness in a coffin. This is about light and life, not death and darkness. So the other way it's presented in the shoebox is death and darkness. So not only you have all these themes, but the body thing. There's all this human anatomy that's in this structure, and this is something else that people don't scarcely understand. And why don't they understand it? Well, because they don't understand the Peshat. They don't understand the simple. They don't understand the literal, because they just figure, well, these details don't matter. The book of Corinthians, as I recall, is saying, talks about the body, comparing the body unto, God's dwelling place, his temple and everything. Well, how do you know anything about this comparison if you don't understand what, this is the only thing in all the Bible where it's like, thus saith the Lord, build it this way. And this, the human anatomy content, that's really phenomenal. I have 60 pages of content drafted right now, and I've started at the head, and I've been working my way down. I'm still not down to the throat yet, as far as the correlations between the structural aspects. How many bones are in this part of the human anatomy? How many bones of this are in the tabernacle, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, this is literally the gift that keeps on giving. And no one has really recognized it for much more than the cosmological apologetic. And again, it roots at this the problem that no one's taking the Peshat seriously enough. There's a larger string of content of divinely inspired, thus saith the Lord type stuff. It's 2 chapters straight, basically, to describe how this tabernacle facility is laid out. And I know people will go hunting and fishing for cosmological insights, and generally speaking, they're cherry picking single verses. And yeah, it's nice to be able to say, okay, I'm rooted in Genesis cosmology. I can go back to Genesis 1, and if you don't believe Genesis 1, well, everything falls apart from there, right? I mean, so the importance of the sanctity of the text is something we all need to take very seriously. But the unique thing about this tabernacle, it's actually commanded. It's commanded. It said, do this, make this. And I just don't see where that command has ever been rescinded. And, even if you look at Solomon's building, I see Solomon's temple that came after is not a more glorious thing. I see that as a form of replacement theology. Because you have this idea in the Torah, it's just like, it's very, thus saith the Lord. And when David wanted to build a temple, what was the message that Nathan brought to him? He says, when did I ever ask my people Israel that I needed a house of cedar? And so this, this priority that's then ascribed to Solomon's temple. I mean, it's more than priority. It's money. It's gobs of money. It's the equivalent of about $150 billion to $200 billion. I mean, for point of reference, that's enough to buy every state in the union in 2 NFL stadiums. So that's how much money they spent on that other thing. Where, the message is like, hey, I've been quite happy in this tent, because I designed it, and I told you to make it this way. I think that's one of Israel's problems is dismantling the thing. And, that was done under Solomon as they commissioned the temple. Why not keep the other one up in remembrance? Why not? The same way you retire something like, the last steam locomotive, you'd put it in a museum. You wouldn't haul it to China for scrap metal. This should have been recognized as being a national treasure of sorts. But, why they dismantled it and how and everything's another thing. People don't realize that this tent outlasted Solomon's temple. Solomon's temple is around like a 4th century survivor, and this was 480 years. It outlasted either of the temples, and yet people, they ascribe more importance to the temple, and I think the reason that people give this tabernacle so little credence is because they've been conditioned into it. And just as the word tabern or taberna for tabernacle, again, that's it's more or less English like tavern. And this tavern idea, I mean, it's another dark place where you're buying drinks. And a mishkan, this is a dwelling place. And you want to talk about the moed, Ohel Moed. It's actually described as the Ohel Moed more than it's described as the Mishkan. And so getting into the tent of seasons, I don't know, did I send you that article, Zen, on how this is related to the Moedim, or how it'd be used quite possibly in the calendar and the feasts?
No, you didn't. I don't believe so. But if you did, I did not see it. But definitely interested in that, because that is one of the topics that I'm very fascinated with regard to the calendar. And so I'm definitely interested in what you have to say. We've only got 3 minutes before break, but as a structural engineer as well, when we come back, I'd like for you to share what it is that got you interested. And also, you said that you're using the Hebrew. So what texts are you examining that brought you to this discernment?
Sure. Are we after the break or
yeah, we've got a few minutes. So.
Okay. I guess for point of clarification, I am a mechanical engineer as opposed to a structural engineer. Mechanical engineers, for the record, we do examine structures. We take a lot of the same materials classes and statics. So we have some of the shared common knowledge, but it's a technical. It gets into structural engineering is a little bit more specialized in just buildings, and so as a mechanical engineer, we're usually into building things with more parts. There's an old engineering joke that we always would argue whose curriculum is better, and we would argue with the civil engineers. So civil and structural engineers are kind of they're closer parallels. Civil, structural, and architectural engineers. So they're doing roads and buildings and stuff, and we always say, yes, civil engineers mechanical engineers build bombs. Civil engineers build targets. So that was just kind of this point of contrast. But it's a lot of the same thing. So I didn't really have any interest in this from a professional standpoint. Like that's not what drove me into it first. I mean, I almost had to blow dust off of textbook covers to, it's like, okay, I have to go back and review my skills at statics and getting into different material strengths and modeling. So I had to do some of that, but I really wasn't bent or intent on saying, hey, I'm going to redesign this tabernacle because I think it's silly and ugly and I have a cool idea. This is I refer to this as a discovery, and I I find it a little aggravating if people just want to reduce this to again my creativity, my design. It's like this comes about because I get hyper literal in all this, in all these texts and all these ideas. So,
all right, well, we'll go more into that when we come back. We'll be right back, everyone.
Discover the extraordinary.
Every day, questions arise.
Are the stories in the Bible true?
What if I told you that there are hundreds of confirming witnesses,
which give intricate detail to the stories in the Bible?
Have you ever found yourself deep in the rabbit hole with questions that no one seemed to have the answers to? Join us every other Friday at 9 p.m. Eastern Time for our Ask Me Anything series with author and researcher Zen Garcia, as he sheds light on the mysteries which have us all searching together. Many truth seekers are constantly studying alone. But there is a place where we can come together. The Digital Readers Club is our online ecclesia meant for those who've forsaken churchianity, but still want the closeness of a family to study with. Join us every Saturday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time to put together the puzzle pieces of truth scattered throughout the ancient scriptures.
Your partnership with Sacred Word Publishing goes further than the publishing of ancient manuscripts and weekly video content.
You also make a huge impact across the earth in orphanages in Myanmar, India, Uganda, and Kenya.
Your support is crucial for the development of the ecclesia of real truth seekers.
We thank you for joining us in hosting Secrets Revealed, Momentary Zen, the Digital Readers Club, Ask Me Anything series, and other shows that have helped lead so many to the truth of salvation.
To become even more involved, please visit patreon.com/sacredwordpublishing, where you can partake in exclusive, interactive, patron-only content and help us continue shining the light of love in this darkened world.
Hello, friends. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm your host, Zen Garcia.
Welcome back, everybody. And so, Andy, let me just turn it back over to you, brother. And if you would share the story of just what you were doing, because you have a great interest in the study of Scripture, and you have a background in understanding the Hebrew, and that is fascinating in and of itself. It's a skill set that I certainly wish I had myself. But tell us the story of what it is that you were doing that led to your discovery, led to you reconsidering, and God, revealing this information to you, and then what led you into Project 314.
Are we back?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
All right. And you heard what I said, right?
I didn't hear that. The call was cut out on this end. I don't know what.
Oh, okay. I was just saying that why don't you, now that we're back, why don't you share the story of, because you are a biblical scholar and you also have, you're very proficient in the language. And so tell us how it is and, that the Most High led you in discovery of this information, and what led you to the whole project of 314.
Well, I've had a weird professional path with a few layoffs here and there, and after one layoff, I went overseas and I started studying the text, just the English text more, and realized that I started dwelling on some of the Old Testament priesthood stuff. Got kind of fascinated by that, and then like 2005 or so, I ended up going to Israel for a vacation. And on the way there, I read the book The Maker's Diet, which is a really fascinating testimony about a guy who came down with Crohn's disease, and he self-healed, but a doctor's recommendation on going all organic and all kosher. And at the same time, I'm like, well, it's a nice testimony, but the book doesn't deal with all these other biblical do this and don't do that, or you can do this. And so I took it upon myself to write a book on that topic, and that's my the book called Eat Like Jesus, and that's dealing with the idea of kosher out of from the Garden of Eden onward, and that's one of the things that I basically. I think I spent let me say 7 years writing or rewriting that book, and that was when I was kind of part time doing that as kind of a hobby, as besides engineering. But then when I went to Israel, that was 2011 time frame, and in Israel, once I got more language under my belt, I started looking back at all the different stuffs, and I actually discovered that kosher goes all the way back to Genesis 1. And, there's a lot of people who believe that Genesis 1, everyone's vegans and stuff like that, but it actually talks about how man is being given all these animals to eat, but all the animals are vegan. All the animals that he's given eat are vegan, as opposed to the fact that the animals were only supposed to eat grass. That notion doesn't hold, because, well, bats eat fruit, and so do gorillas, and other animals eat animals. So it's not like we've changed the nature of animals since then. So anyway, but going through that iteration, I'd been through that iteration enough times where I had to do enough rewrites, and I'm like, I've been betrayed by English translations in my writing project so many times that I'm like, okay, well, what's true, and what is this actually saying? And so going to Israel, I set out to learn Hebrew in more or less from secular people, because my trust in the religious establishments was very limited in that sense, in that everyone's got their spin and everything. It's just like, well, just tell me what the raw language is. And in between modern Hebrew and biblical Hebrew, there's not this huge chasm that the people like to envision, I guess, between the two variants. It's like if you can still read King James, if you speak modern English, you can still read King James and get the gist of it without having to explain, what it means for Abraham to have known Sarah, things like that. Mm-hmm. These are things that are, some of it's just really common sense, and some of the words just do not change, and so those core verbs and roots and so forth. So that kind of got me primed into in a position where I could look at these texts with a lot more scrutiny. And I was actually doing a word study on a different project, and I was kind of early on in that project, and I happened upon cherubim and started looking at this. And well, the second real occurrence of cherubim, the first is in Genesis and the second's in Exodus. And so I'm like, oh, what are these all about? And so I started looking into the curtains, the tabernacle curtains, because it's talking about them having cherubim, and go, what is this all about? And so I just started looking at, well, how are these actually configured? And as I was trying to answer that question, that's when I happened upon this issue of the math as it pertains to the curtains. And there are more texts describing the curtains than there are describing the Ark of the Covenant. And so the Ark of the Covenant is seen as like the holiest thing in the Bible, or at least in the Old Testament, certainly, and with that being the case, with that level of reverence, it's like, well, why is it so little text is dedicated, and compared to these crazy curtains, so these curtains are being described, and everyone pretty much yawns right past that, and so for whatever reason, I just started pulling on that thread because there was some detail in there, and I looked on the web, and it's like, well, gee, everyone's opinions on how this is arranged are all different. So I started looking closer in the Hebrew, and well, I saw the numbers, I guess, before I really started digging too much closer and deeper in the Hebrew. But so that's really what got me, kind of propelled in that direction. And once I found the pi constant, I said, wow, this sucker is round. This has got to be a hint of it's round. So there I had a preconceived notion, and this is why, again, being careful with any cosmological connections is, for people to say that, I made the design come out this way in accordance to backfit my own cosmology or something like that, that statement couldn't be farther from the truth. I didn't look at anything cosmological when I was digging into any of this. So as I was, I was just being literal with the text, literal with the dimensions, and saying the dimensions must fit into, if it says that this piece is 10 cubits long, it must be 10 cubits long. And once you start modeling things in scale like that, they can only be arranged in so many certain ways. And then the text also describes a lot of the anatomy, the hardware, the configurations of parts and everything, and where it gets kind of also very interesting, even when you get into like the Paleo Hebrew. So the Paleo Hebrew is just another depth of revelation that's all packed in here, and you can see all these fascinating images on all the different components, where you're starting with a round model and the round thing. A lot of people don't realize that the language doesn't work well. The Hebrew language doesn't work well. It actually works better in translation because they're so able to massage and steer it to fit their preconceived notions. So again, this isn't me being like saying, hey, I got a better way to do things. I'm like, hey, this way that they have was wrong because it's literally not describing that. Like the edges of the curtains, it says to join it on, and it uses the term kaitzona. And so kaitzona, this is where we get our English word cuts from. So kaitzona comes from kaitza or from katza or from katzatz. And again, you can hear the word cuts, right in it. So this is getting into the idea of the cut edges. And so once you know how loom weaving works, and you know which edges the curtain you cut, you understand that they've been putting the wrong edges of the curtains together incorrectly, and that's the beginning of the Exodus text. And then they've been following through with on the mechanical side and force fitting their frame to fit the fabrics which they connected improperly. So once you change that paradigm, the structure wants to build itself. It really does. Once you stare at the language and you say, well, what does this do? It has to be such and such. It's connected and related to these other things in these ways. I mean, there's so many complementary and functional descriptions that are given in it that it just blows your mind once you see it. The depth of the technical power of the specification is just amazing. So.
And which text was it that you were examining? You said
This is all. It's all Exodus Masoretic, really. I mean, the Masoretic text. Yeah, and actually, I've made a point to compare this to Septuagint, and I have to. I'll hereby apologize to any people who are in favor of the Septuagint as far as what they think it gives for revelation and quality. It's fractional compared to what the Masoretic has to offer. There's certain key phrases like in Hebrew you got negvava tamana, which is towards the south and towards the right. So it's talking about the south side of the structure of this round structure. There's a south half of it, and the towards the right. In English, that's translated as south side southward. What sense does it make? Does that make? If you imagine we have north, south, east, and west, there's 4 cardinal points. And in Wisconsin, when we go to the northern Wisconsin for recreation, we call that up north. We refer to north as being up for whatever reason, I guess. And then you say down south, right? So the same way we say up north and down south. Well, in Hebrew, you have different terms that can be used. If I'm going up to Minocqua, or from here up to Wausau, that's a relative. Or if I would go down to Florida from Wisconsin, these ups and downs, they're kind of understood in that capacity. And if I say down south, it's redundant, but not totally. So it's a little bit like that with the south side southward here, because in English, then if I said I was going down south, I wouldn't say I'm going south southy or south southish or something like that. I'm saying I'm going down south. And that's where the translation gap is in English, or at least one of them, which is it best translates as making it as something south and clockwise, because clockwise is towards the right. You turn which way do you turn the steering wheel, to the left or to the right? Well, you usually don't tell someone in the car, well, turn the wheel counterclockwise. You say turn to the left, and it's the top of the wheel that you start spinning in that direction. So we use left and right semi-synonymous sometimes with clockwise and everything. So nobody was, I guess in Hebrew days, assuming they have the sundial, which is maybe a segue into the next topic there. But yeah, the sundial is it's the shadow sweeps in one direction all the time, right? It always sweeps in clockwise direction if you're north of the equator, and south of the equator. I guess it depends upon what time of year and blah blah blah. But back to this south side southward bit. This is another really key thing that you do not see that when you're talking about the Septuagint texts. So that detail, that's one particular detail that's lost, and this is why I kind of snicker if someone tells me that the Septuagint is so much better and more accurate and everything. I think it's all just raw speculation and the anatomical terms too. Just once you understand the connections between human anatomy and different parts of the tabernacle, it just blows your mind. I mean, I have 16 pages written on comparing this to the human eye, and I'm actually looking for people who are interested in doing some of this more medical research. But again, they don't understand the Peshat, and part of the reason they don't understand the Peshat is they don't understand the importance of this revelation in the whole scheme of things. But this is just serious, thus saith the Lord type content, and it's not really revered as such. So
it's interesting that you brought that up, because there's a a passage that I discovered when I was writing my book on the firmament and the vaulted dome of the earth, and it also associates the eye with the metaphor and the symbolism in similar manner. I'll share that passage when we come back from the next break. But you were talking about the calendar and how it is also associated with your discoveries, and so can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, not too long into it. I mean, I have to go back to some of my critical research time, my pre-research time, my pre-staging time for this discovery. I was in central Wisconsin. I took a part-time job as a snowboard instructor, and one place where you took all the people who were on their the kind of a schooling break is you took them inside the yurt. They had a ski school yurt, which was all nice and toasty warm and hot chocolate and kind of smelling like stinky mittens and and this yurt is very they got almost all yurts have skylights, and so you can just see how the sun traverses over the floor, different times of day. It's a different place. And it dawned on me after I had discovered, that the Mishkan was much more like a yurt. It's like, holy cow, this skylight, this does the function of a sundial. And I frankly didn't even stop to think about it till a few years after the notion that, again, Mishkan is the Hebrew word for tabernacle, and to say it's a Hebrew word for tabernacle isn't really accurate, because now I'm trying to describe a holy Hebrew word to a broken English word that came from Latin. And going back into this idea of the Mishkan, Shekan is or Shekinah, so the Shekinah glory, as people like to say. So it's the idea of the dwelling, and so Mishkan is literally, it's from dwelling. Or you could even argue the womb of the dwelling, or with the mem being synonymous with the womb, and or water possibly. So if you look at this Mishkan word, so the Mishkan is the tabernacle is the Mishkan. It's only described as the Mishkan, and there's not, the temple is never described as the Mishkan, and no other structure seems to be referred to as the Mishkan. So this is a unique thing in the Torah. And what I realized is that, I didn't realize this till a couple of years ago, that I think until I wrote the article, it's like I knew that it was also called the tent of meeting. Okay, but what is a tent of meeting? Well, a tent of meeting is the Ohel Moed, and so Ohel in Hebrew is tent, and Moed is more or less the Moedim, the seasons, the appointed times, the feasts. And traditionally, people are all, they get jacked up on trying to figure out the calendar dates, the calendar discussion, and rightly so, because if these are holy times and holy convocations, we're supposed to keep them, then, well, by all means, we should call them important. But there's also the idea of a place, and the tabernacle was the Ohel Moed, and really before Israel was told to do feasts in the wilderness, the priority was just to make the tabernacle. And so if you look at the Exodus, let my people go story. So let's start with there. The first time where Moses says, let my people go so that they may have a festival to me in the wilderness. The first let my people go mandate is given in conjunction with the plans of the feasts. And so the feast, Chag is one of the terms used for feast, or which comes from Chagag, and Chagag is basically, and the Hebrew word chug, is built on that same root too, and it having to do with the idea of a circuit or to revolve, and so people, the idea of the Hebrew word for let's party is it's built on it's a mirotze lach gog, who wants to party is is a way of saying, connecting that party, that hug, or that the chag is with that. So you have the idea of the chet in Hebrew is kind of like our letter H, or like the letter Hey, but it's got a closed off top, and it used to represent the tent wall. In the Gimel, it represents one of two things. Typically, is either a camel, as in something walking with legs, or like it looks a little bit like a little guy walking with legs, and just this idea of gyrating, dancing around the structure is a very prominent theme. Is you're all rejoicing, you're all surrounding this. This is kind of like a Jericho thing. Is they're encircling and going around and around, and even to this day, a lot of people who've kind of rediscovered the feast stuff are they get into Davidic dancing, and which is all circle based. I know there's some within some of the Jewish community things here. They actually have different Israeli dancing, which is all, again, it's all circle based. It's circles and patterns, and it's all revolving. So this is the explicit purpose of taking them out of the wilderness, at least the first go around. And when they got out, they were in Sinai, and the first thing to do, okay, here's the commandments, and here's also build this thing. And so like the whole back half of Exodus is really dedicated to build this thing. And of course they did the golden calf. And that's, I guess, I have some theories on that. I have to defer that to another time. But this notion of building the tabernacle before you're really having the feasts, this is really what they did. And when did they set it up? They set up the tabernacle on Aviv 1. Now, I know that you are or as I recall, you are a between lunar Sabbatarian and the Enoch calendar type guy, or
right.
I guess let me. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but or strap labels on you where they don't belong. But my understanding is you have you're in pursuit of understand the calendar, the Enochian calendar, right?
Yes, the heavenly calendar. Yes. And how you have to use both the sun and the moon and the planets and the zodiac to establish what Enoch describes for the motions of the luminaries, and the greater clockwork system of the heavenly calendar that God established. And so
Mm-hmm. So one thing that people don't understand about the courtyard is particular. Everyone's, if you got the thing round, I'm sorry, if you got it rectangular, I'm sorry, it's not really good for anything. But once you realize that that's a round thing, and again, this is where our 314 dimension, that the courtyard surrounding the tabernacle is 314 cubits long. So that's associated with 100 cubic diameter and a 50 cubit radius. So if you figure, twice for times 2 roughly for 2 feet per cubit, there's different cubit standards, 25.2, 21.6, 20.6, 18 inches is another popular, and down to 15, and so there's a number of ancient standards that you can cite. You can start arguing about the royal cubit, the sacred cubit, and there's a royal Egyptian, and so I'm sure you've seen the David Flynn works on the Temple at the Center of Time, and I tend to favor a 25-inch cubit, 25.2, and I think it's related to the 2520 as far as numerically, which is 360, which is a perfect circle, and times 7, and so that's times 7 is like it's speaking of like a Shemitah or something like that, a 7-year cycle. So 360 times 7, and there's some really interesting prophetic things that happen if you track time in a 360-day year. Case in point is like the temple, the first temple and the second temple So the one of Solomon, and then the one that was destroyed in, the Herod upgrade in 70 AD, right? If you look at the time between those two temple destructions, 586 BC to 70, and you count that in years, you're not going to get anything special. But if you realize that happened on the 9th of Av in 586 and the 9th of Av in 70, you realize that it happened 666 years apart. Okay?
Oh, wow.
So,
all right, hold on, brother. Hold on. We'll be right back for second hour, everyone.
Every day, questions arise.
Are the stories in the Bible true?
What if I told you that there are hundreds of confirming witnesses,
which give intricate detail to the stories in the Bible?
Have you ever found yourself deep in the rabbit hole with questions that no one seemed to have the answers to? Join us every other Friday at 9 p.m. Eastern Time for our Ask Me Anything series with author and researcher Zen Garcia, as he sheds light on the mysteries which have us all searching together. Many truth seekers are constantly studying alone. But there is a place where we can come together. The Digital Readers Club is our online ecclesia meant for those who've forsaken churchianity but still want the closeness of a family to study with. Join us every Saturday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time to put together the puzzle pieces of truth scattered throughout the ancient scriptures.
Your partnership with Sacred Word Publishing goes further than the publishing of ancient manuscripts and weekly video content.
You also make a huge impact across the earth in orphanages in Myanmar, India, Uganda, and Kenya.
Your support is crucial for the development of the ecclesia of real truth seekers.
We thank you for joining us in hosting Secrets Revealed, Momentary Zen, the Digital Readers Club, Ask Me Anything series, and other shows that have helped lead so many to the truth of salvation.
To become even more involved, please visit patreon.com/sacredwordpublishing, where you can partake in exclusive, interactive, patron-only content and help us continue shining the light of love in this darkened world.
Also, the world resembles the ball of his eye. The ocean that encircles the earth is like unto the white of the eye. The dry land is the iris, Jerusalem the pupil, and the temple the image mirrored in the pupil of the eye. One final thing with regard, you had mentioned how that Jericho, that they were circling around. And it's interesting that in the book of Jasher, it describes that it was on the second month of Kadesh, which is actually today. How interesting that tonight is Rosh Kadesh for the month of Iyar. And it says in this passage, and it was in the second month on the first day of the month that Yahuwah said to Joshua, rise up, behold, I have given Jericho into thy hand with all the people thereof, and all your fighting men shall go round the city once each day. Thus shall ye do for 6 days. And on the seventh day they went around the city 7 times, and the priests blew upon the trumpets. And so, how fascinating that today is the anniversary of the fall of Jericho.
That's very interesting.
Yeah, very. All right, but let me turn it back over to you, brother, and continue with the calendar and whatever else you would like to bring forth in associating.
My mind started tracking your the reading that you started doing. I lost track of where I was before the break, but I don't know if you recall, you helped me out, but
well, you were just talking about as far as the roundness, and then the establishment of the structure, and then you were talking about what was it exactly?
Maybe the curtain, getting into the curtain arrangements is the outer, the outer courtyard.
Yes, and how it was built circular for the dancing and the feasting. And,
yeah. Okay, there we go.
Yeah,
and so with that, that speaks also to purpose as well as description. The idea of hug. And actually the English word hug. If you think about the English word hug, what are you doing? You wrap your arms around someone.
Yes.
Well, not of course if you're social distancing, if you believe in that sort of thing. But,
yeah, right.
not everyone believes in that the same. Mm-hmm. So anyway, this idea of encircling. So the idea of a circle and a circuit. They share obviously in the English world, getting into the etymology, there's overlap there, but this idea of the circle and the circuit, as it pertains to this structure. So now, if you got 314 cubit measurement around it, and it goes 100 across, you have the issue of orientation. You have the issue of Aviv 1. So it's interesting that Aviv is the only month in the only biblical month in the Torah that is listed by name. And I would go so far as to say that's not the name of the month. And it wasn't intended to be the name of a month necessarily. And I say that based on the following, that you have the idea of Aviv is related to the Hebrew Saviv, and Saviv is basically spelled Samek, Bet, Yod, Bet. Vet, what have you. So you have Aviv, and so the Aviv, you're replacing that Samek, which is a circle, with an Aleph. Now an Aleph that's like the letter A in the English alphabet, and so you have this Aviv. So it's spelt with the same 2 of the letters being the same, and it's those the double bets. A bet is representing a house, or more specifically a tent, and more specifically a tent floor plan. the old tents. And so those old tents had one open side to them. And when you have two, between the Aviv and the Saviv, you have the two bets, that are joined together with I guess with a yud, with a hand, basically. And so you understand that you have these two half houses being put together. Well, let's talk about this from the standpoint of calendar time, right? So if half of the year, and the Hebrew word for year is shana, and so shana is actually referring to two. It's from getting into shana, is shin. The idea of shin is having to do with the teeth, and teeth there's always two. Try chewing your food with one tooth sometime. Even so here two and teeth is a those are cousin ideas. So the shin and shana, it has also is related into the idea of changes. And so people will gripe a lot about the Jews referring to the time in the fall is Rosh Hashanah, and Rosh is head, and Hashanah is the head of the year. And so they gripe and they say, oh, it's not the head of the year. Well, guess what? A year has two heads, like it or not. There's one in the spring and one in the fall. There's one entering into the growing season, and one is coming out. And so you've got the time of the equinox going in and the time going out. Now, I'm not saying that equinox and solstices are by mandate holy days. And some people I've shared this with are they're really intent on saying, well, the lunar calendar has got to be driving X, Y, and Z. But I'm not saying that your feast days are all rooted in sun observation or anything like that. I personally believe, and this is going out on a limb a little bit, I guess, the works of Immanuel Velikovsky, who talks about how the ancients, they recorded history as a 360-day year. I personally believe that the duration of the year has changed since the time of Genesis, on multiple occasions actually, and the Bible texts speak to this. You've got the idea of Joshua, the sun standing still. You have the idea of Hezekiah, the sun going back, the shadow going backwards on the sundial. These are noteworthy events, and there's cultures all over the world that record similar things. And one thing that they really have in common is at the time of Hezekiah, they added 5 1/4 days to the calendar. There's like 15 cultures at least that are on record as having doing this. They call 5 days or 5 1/4 days is the Day of the Dead. I think the Egyptians call it that. The Chinese have got this on record. The Romans have got it on record. The Mayans. So this is spanning multiple continents. So I believe that, and there's a book out besides Velikovsky's, I should mention. There's another one called Catastrophism in the Old Testament, the Earth-Mars conflicts, and I think it's Don Wesley Patton, if I'm not mistaken, the author. And that book talks about, he's proposing the idea that the orders in the heavens were more organized and orderly, with more perfect numbers and a more perfect harmony than they are today. Now, I tend to not discuss calendar. I tend to not try to argue modern day calendar specifics without at least establishing these principles going backwards. And if you go to Genesis, it talks about how there's 5 months and 150 days. It's speaking of those as synonymous. And you have the book of Daniel, times and a half a time. The idea of 3.5 years and the 1,260 days and the 42 months. Okay, so something in the math doesn't line up if you're going to start doing day counts here. And I think this is, and the 666 example, I'm not saying that 2,000 years ago that the calendar was at 360 at that period. I think that period of 360s expired at the time of Hezekiah, which was like 700 BC. So the over the course of history, I think that the heavens, the appointed times have been given hiccups in a sense. And so at what point do you use the moon to count your time? Do you use the sun? Do you use the sun and the moon to mark it? So these are all, fine and fascinating debates. And my point in bringing this up isn't to spark, any preference or allegiance to system A or system B. I mean, I'm very convinced, based on Velikovsky's research, that he's got of the ancient cultures, that not that many ancient cultures from all these different locations would lie. So a lot of people want to put take the static, the equilibrium that we have of the heavens, or what we believe to be an equilibrium, and put it in a calendar mechanism like Starry Night, a program, and they like to work themselves backwards 2,000 years or 2,500 years, or fit in a number. It's like, oh, Moses was coming down the mountain exactly, according to this on Starry Night. Well, I don't hold that as historically accurate, because Starry Night is a program that doesn't include the upset, the hiccup from Hezekiah's sundial. It doesn't include the same thing with Joshua's long day. So I'm very I'm convinced that the history, the heavens, they were not in perfect equilibrium. And so understanding that then Aviv being the first month, and Aviv, I'm convinced that we are on 30-day months and 360-day years back at the time of the Torah, when this was all given. And at that time, when they were coming out of Egypt, I also think during Egypt they experienced another one of these upsets, because they had 3 days of darkness. It talks about in Exodus, and then there's other cultures too that have recorded upsets to sunrise and sunset times and stuff like that. They're pretty weird testimonies, but so when that day is being given, this is Velikovsky theorizing here. I'm kind of regurgitating as I recall it. It's been a while since I read it, but he's saying that when the first of Aviv was declared, it was for the point of clarification, saying this will be the first day of the first month for you, and that was while they were in Egypt, and at that same time, I think it is at that same time, Velikovsky makes mention of how the Chinese emperor had sent people all over to the edges of his kingdom to start tracking the heavens again, because there'd been some sort of upset. Okay, so to me, these things, when you start seeing all these things that testify to the same concept. Anyway, supposing that's true, and we have Aviv, and the idea, everyone will agree that Aviv is around the equinox, and so I believe that the moon at that point in time was in sync with the solar cycle in a more mathematically perfect way. So it was 30 to 360, 30-day lunar cycle, 360-day solar cycle. That's what I believe it was. And I know there's a lot of people within the Enoch calendar movements, or the Essenes and whatnot. They put forth the 364-day, which better corresponds with what we have at present. The idea of 90 days, and then kind of an apex on the sun, whether it's a solstice or an equinox,
crossing the equator or reaching the tropics.
Right, and there's interesting research that people are doing on that, and I don't want to make a point and be so dogmatic in my 360 versus whether it's 360 or possibly 364 in some of those periods. I'm not looking to fight anyone on that, but my point of points when it comes to the tabernacle is it's called the Ohel Moed, first of all, and actually there's more times in the Torah that it's describing the Ohel Moed, or where it's calling this tent by this name, than there is mention of the Moedim themselves. And so should we maybe look to the tabernacle again to get our hints of what the feasts are like, of these cycles? I say yes. And one of the things that was really perplexing, looking at Exodus 27, which is where the courtyard is being described, is these issues of orientation. Now I talk about this in my book some, so you might people who are not familiar with this, if they take a look, this is where getting into some of this detail and where some of this detail matters, and being able to give you some of the other hints and revelations here. The courtyard is basically, the shoebox models typically have the courtyard having 60 posts or thereabouts, plus or minus 2 or 4 or whatever, because they put 20 to the north, 20 to the south, 10 to the east, and 10 to the west. And then there's the ones at the courtyard gate. And then there's a question is how they overlap on the corners. I dedicate a few pages in my book showing all the different variances that people have attempted. But it doesn't work that way. It's basically the courtyard's in 2 halves. And it's a northern half and a southern half. And within that, you've got 20 posts, and you've got 20 to the east and 20 to the west. I'm sorry, 10 to the east and 10 to the west is what the text is describing. Well, that's on a half of the courtyard. So what you understand then from that is, because they're first erecting it on Aviv 1. Well, what's special about Aviv 1? Well, if Aviv 1 is the mark of the revolution, okay, the first day of the first month of what? Of the year. And so assuming that the month. Yeah, exactly. And yes. So when do you set up the tabernacle? When is this thing put up on the calendar? It's put up on that day when sunrise and sunset are at 180 degrees opposition.
Yes, and exactly 12 hours a night, 12 hours a day.
Exactly. So that gave them, a definite, ability, precedence to, what's the word for it? That gave them the foundation, or the reference points, I should say, for orientation of the whole structure.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So it dictates the orientation of the structure. It dictates the orientation of the courtyard. Wow. And with the courtyard, that the posts are spaced equally, and they're spaced in such a way where one half is over here, one half is over there. And realizing that what you end up having is one giant ring. You got one giant time ring and one giant compass ring. Uh-huh. And so I'm very convinced that outer courtyard, and this gets into the issue, the mystery of the Ohel Moed.
It's like the Stonehenge.
Yes, exactly. It's a tad more portable.
Yeah, right, exactly.
So I have I have an article. I got like a 12-page article I wrote up on this a year and a half ago or something. I don't know, a couple of years back maybe it was even. And I'm going to be putting that on my website in not too long. I got, and this is kind of an incidental on my website thing. So, it's project314.org, and it's not just the project314.me. It's more than it's intended. It's chartered to exist in a more than one person capacity. And there's so much revelation tied into this thing. I can't come up with it all. I don't have the time of day. I don't, I'm not given infinite insight and knowledge and so forth. And so I've got a web page dedicated to for articles where the idea is to be able to get that so that users can upload articles, so I can get more than just my own content on there. I want to have this as being a centralizing repository for Tabernacle research. So if people are compelled to write things between research and sharing and stuff, that's also what the website is. That's part of one of the functions of the website. And again, thanks to Randy P for helping me out with some of this website stuff, because the website is increasing in its scope and complexity and sophistication and purpose. And we're trying to get it to expand out in these these ways for, combination of building community, but also expanding that knowledge base. And so this is where the, having the an articles page dedicated. So anyway, so he's in the process of polishing a couple of the technicals on that before that is formally launched and functioning there. But so that's what's been keeping me on my on sharing that article. So that article about on the Ohel Moed is one of the first articles that I intend to post on that vehicle. So people could probably download it PDF. So the idea is if you want to produce something PDF, we can upload and download that, or have it designed in like a web page type thing. So yeah, that's the calendar side of this is it's a very untapped and underexplored aspect that people just haven't they haven't put two and two together. They haven't ventured to imagine in that context. Part of it's because people are looking at all these fragments all over the place, rather than the whole "Thus saith the Lord," do it this way, do this, and I that's why I think that building models. So I have a 22-foot wood frame model that I built a few years back. I'm hoping to put some of that on my Patreon page, as far as some of the frame details and everything. But I've also got like a consumer grade model kit that I have in development. It's like 450 parts, and I have pretty much all of it done. I'm working on getting documentation together for it, and then but it's intended so that it's a very practical, hands-on thing. Take you a few hours to build, and sit down, and as long as you got kids who aren't putting the parts in their mouth, they're probably old enough to help. So that's kind of the target intent of that, and the homeschooling side of that, that potential is almost limitless as well. I mean, Betzalel, he's a crafter and all these different things, and up until now, up until recent, we've never had anything real engineering in the Bible, and so this is tech, this is antiquitech, and these are principles that you have to learn today if you're building things as well. I mean, some of this stuff is timeless. The use of fabrics and leathers and metals and woods. I mean, we're still using the same materials as they were back then. We treat them and refine them a little differently, but hey, everything's made out of something. And yeah, it's a great learning project in these things. So.
Well, I want to bring up one point before we get to the next break, and this is fascinating, and I'm kind of mind blown right now because I've been talking to my friend Troy Smith, who's at creationcalendar.com, and I had sent him some passages on the intercalation, which is in the Pirkei Rabbi Eleazar, and it speaks about how the calendar, the 354-day lunar calendar intercalates with the 364-day solar calendar. And he had sent me back some information, and he speculated on exactly what you just told me, that he believed that the moon had in ancient times also synced up with a exact 360-day year. Exactly the way that you just mentioned to me. And this is, I'm sitting here kind of mind blown because this is the first time I've heard of this. And yet here within a couple days, I've got 2 confirming witnesses on this as possibility. And so I'm requesting to anybody that is out there that is listening and that has more information on the possibilities of there having been at some time in the past a synced up 360-day lunar and solar year, which, that's exactly what he was talking about. He said that the moon had a pattern of 30 days for each month in the way that the sun moves through the six gates of heaven. Of course, this is minus the equinoxes and the solstices. But that, however, and I can't say exactly how or what he was alluding to, but I did request that he send me information to, confirm his speculation. And so if anybody else out there has any information on this, please do send it me. I would be interested in examining it.
Yeah.
All right, hold on, brother. We'll be right back. We'll be right back for final segment, everyone.
Every day, questions arise.
Are the stories in the Bible true?
What if I told you that there are hundreds of confirming witnesses,
which give intricate detail to the stories in the Bible?
Have you ever found yourself deep in the rabbit hole with questions that no one seemed to have the answers to? Join us every other Friday at 9 p.m. Eastern Time for our Ask Me Anything series with author and researcher Zen Garcia, as he sheds light on the mysteries which have us all searching together. Many truth seekers are constantly studying alone. But there is a place where we can come together. The Digital Readers Club is our online ecclesia meant for those who've forsaken churchianity, but still want the closeness of a family to study with. Join us every Saturday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time to put together the puzzle pieces of truth scattered throughout the ancient scriptures.
Your partnership with Sacred Word Publishing goes further than the publishing of ancient manuscripts and weekly video content.
You also make a huge impact across the earth in orphanages in Myanmar, India, Uganda, and Kenya.
Your support is crucial for the development of the ecclesia of real truth seekers.
We thank you for joining us in hosting Secrets Revealed, Momentary Zen, the Digital Readers Club, Ask Me Anything series, and other shows that have helped lead so many to the truth of salvation.
To become even more involved, please visit patreon.com/sacredwordpublishing, where you can partake in exclusive, interactive, patron-only content and help us continue shining the light of love in this darkened world.
Hello friends, thank you for joining us this evening. I'm your host, Zen Garcia.
All right, welcome back, everybody, for final segment. I'm your host, Zen Garcia. This is Secrets Revealed here on Truth Frequency Radio, and I'm honored to be interviewing Andy Hoy of Project 314. We've been talking about some very interesting topics, and especially lately the connection of the tabernacle with the possibilities of the sundial and the movements of the luminaries, the tracking of the calendar. I mean, it's absolutely fascinating. And Andy, you were wanting to say something before we went to break there, and so yeah, if you would.
Yeah, just kind of a couple of closing remarks on the calendar. The book Manuel Velikovsky, Worlds in Collision. He's like the source that has brought a lot of this to light. He's writing about this back in the 50s. He was a friend with Albert Einstein. The man he was like at least quadlingual, and he was basically reconstructing history in his spare time as a hobby, and he was a Russian Jew who ended up moving to Germany and left around World War II, came to the U.S. and he started pulling on the thread of Joshua's long day and looking at how the meteors were coming down, and he was wondering if any other culture had witnessed that in that region, the Middle East, and from there he basically shows how a lot of these catastrophes that are in the Tanakh were witnessed in other places of the world at the same time. And so he's using some of these as a timeline to synchronize secular history with biblical history, which is it's just a fascinating thing, as well as some of their I was trying to think of the name of the Mayan, the Vedas, the Mayan, the Popol was it Popol Vuh or whatever?
Yeah, the Popol Vuh.
Yeah, and he's just making all sorts of fascinating connections. But the one I want to tell you about is, as I recall, is a Roman or maybe Romanian witness where they had no, I think it was Roman, because they had a 36-day month for a while. Okay, and basically, if you sync that into a 360-day year, it gives you an answer of why the months are named the way they are. So we have January, February, March, April, May, June, July, August, etc. And so they get more familiar once we get into September 7, October
Right.
8,
Yeah.
November 11, December Des is 10. It's not 12.
Right. Yeah.
So the idea of a decimal. So they basically added in the month of January after Janus and February after I forget what. And that's why February is kind of this broken, stitch them together leap month. But basically, he was saying that for a while, the Romans were actually on a 10-month calendar, a 360-day and 36-day months. So there's points and times in history, and if that's true, he didn't seem to have a lot of other records, kind of supporting that, but a lot of them he did, and especially that shift at Hezekiah's time. And Hezekiah's time, it's a miniature prophecy of what's going on in Jerusalem, and all the nations are descending upon it, and it gets supernaturally delivered. It's this big, it's a huge messianic prophecy, and so it's fitting that this then would be, in conjunction with Hezekiah's time. That's just my opinion on that. So,
wow, that's fascinating as well. And so again, I'm requesting anybody that has information more about this, but certainly, yeah, I have that book, and so I'll have to reference it and see, what more I can find of this particular topic. But if you would, Andy, give out your, contact and your information once more, and where people can go to find and support your books and the products that you have released, and then we'll continue on, and anything that you would like to cover to bring to light in this final segment. I certainly want to give you the opportunity to share whatever you'd like.
Sure. Okay. thank you. It's project314.org. You can start there, and that covers the history of this whole discovery, as well as a lot of like the where I've been as far as different projects and products that I've been working on in making this revelation known. So again, looking at the scope of this is more than just like, hey, look what I found. It's really intended to say, hey, look what we ought to do. And it's a problem of inspiration and conviction. In conjunction with this history thing on my website, I got one page, a manifesto, I'm calling it, and it kind of touches on some of these issues of why. Well, how does that sit with you? That as is, the God that would you worship a God in a box, as I used to have on my website. That was the opening page. It was a provocative idea, and if the answer is yes, my response to that is I'm sorry to hear that, because it's so devoid of logic and intelligence. It offends me to the point of I'm not worshiping that God, because that God's incompetent, and if you're worshiping an incompetent God, you got serious problems. That's and this basically restoring the idea of the presence, the name, the thus saith the Lord thing. There's so many different layers of revelation within it that again it'll change the way that we understand the Bible. And so I want to again underscore the fact that this is more than just saying, hey, look, I found pie in the tabernacle, or hey, look, it's a dome. Multiple layers of revelation, and I guess getting into the issue of prophecy being fulfilled. I think that this is prophecy being fulfilled in modern times. Look, we just had this lockdown, let my people go bit going on, right? Mm-hmm. And here we are in the first and second months, where suddenly I'm more interviews coming out here, and this is becoming better known. So is it time? If we build it, will he come? Right? It's I don't see where the commandment to build is withdrawn. And if the Torah is something that where the law has not been done away with, and the Torah is given to us for all these other reasons and purposes, then why not treat it as such, and why leave this thing in isolation and in shambles? There's that zeal for my house will consume me, and another thing is Amos. In those days, he will I will restore David's fallen tent. Is this a reference to the restoration of the Mishkan? So yeah, anyone should check out. I've got different areas of my website. So one of them is the manifesto section. One's the journey. I'm getting into the history of where I've all been with this discovery. There's kind of a page dedicated to engineers, people who are working on this project with me here. We have let's see. I'm just trying to go from memory. I'm basically trying to make a compilation of articles on it. I've got kind of get involved stuff for people who are interested in volunteering on this. Between volunteering and donating, I do have a Patreon page that I've launched recently, and I'm hoping to from that launch basically meetings, kind of project meetings for people who want more inside scoop. And people who are really interested in seeing this project expand, develop, grow, and people who really want to become a part of it. That being said, I'm interested in finding medical people who are interested in studying the anatomical side of this along with me. Again, I got 60 pages of content, and I could record more, but I just you just don't have the time of day to do everything, and so. The only way that we can really reach out is pushing in all these directions. So, the books and everything. I mean, you can always start with buying a book. If you think I'm crazy, I don't have it. I don't think it's listed this way on my website, but 30. This is something I mean to be including 30-day money back guarantee. If if you think I'm nuts, if you think that I'm making all this up from scratch, and there's no real rhyme or reason because you have your English Bible and you know better, and I challenge you to put your money where your mouth is, and prove me wrong. And I have a page dedicated actually to frequently asked questions, as well as questions you can go and ask your pastor, your rabbi, or your spiritual guru who thinks that this is crazy. Because a lot of people will just go and they say, hey, my pastor doesn't say this is good, or well, whatever. Is your pastor an engineer? Have they ever looked at all these details? Probably not. Most people just go all sheepish because, to be honest, nobody studies this, and I didn't study this until I stumbled upon it. So I'm not looking to shame everyone, but I'm speaking in terms of a reality. Tabernacle study is not there's never any courses dedicated to it in college, even in seminaries and stuff. I mean, they gloss over it, and they get nothing from it, and all the stuff that they get from it is borrowed and broken. And so they'll never understand when they've started down a wrong path. There's only so much you can learn when you're on the wrong path. So
right. Gosh, that is exactly the way I feel about so much that I teach. How funny. But hey, brother, I wanted to ask you also, just since we're caught up in the times with regard to the coronavirus, and just where we are in the timeline of the end of days and the fig tree generation. What's your take? How do you feel about all this?
I call it the Coronasaurus Rex because it wrecks everything it touches.
Right. Yeah. Certainly.
And there's I could use other terms like scamdemic and
like that,
or perhaps COVIDiot.
I like that.
From day one, when they started announcing it, I'm like, I smell a rat here. And I listened to the numbers, and I've been following this since the very beginning of it. And I've really let off my conspiracy study, especially since I've seen the Mishkan. But this has derailed me, as I'm sure as it's derailed a lot of other people because of the far-reachingness of it. And speaking of that, before the let my people go thing, when this was first brewing, first of all, you have to look at the Chinese, and it's like, okay, so a bunch of Chinese people are, they were supposedly suppressing this. It's like, no, they were probably suppressing a whole bunch of protesters, because the Chinese were starting to rise up and protest. And I was thinking that this was just a cover story for them being able to, crack down on a whole, oversized neighborhood of rebels and trample them underfoot and use human health as a blanket and a smokescreen for all that. That was my first guess with that. Since then, I saw an interesting Barron's article that said the original Chinese reports of the coronavirus expansion were actually, if you look at it statistically, so like an exponential or logarithmic curve is. So if you model something and you say, well, it's going to grow at such and such a rate, and use like a natural logarithm and everything. So I can take points off of a curve, and chances are that those points aren't going to, if your model is perfect, they may correspond with reality fairly well, but they won't be exactly. And what these guys at Barron's were saying, these are guys who do nothing but, crunch numbers and look at, money and patterns and trends and all that. They said that, statistically speaking, it was impossible to come up with data that they had in real life, because real life, the numbers deviate more than this, right? So you expect, if I see a pattern of 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, I mean, there's a certain perfect normality to all that. And instead, what you see in real life, you'd see 2, and then one day you'd see 5, and then maybe 7 and 12, it might follow kind of the same overall curve, but the way that people collect data is imperfect. The way that people report data is imperfect. So, the point being is the original data that they led with all this is highly suspect, just because it's so statistically perfect according to the curve model that they were matching it to. So that was the first confirmation. It's like this is just more BS. I found it problematic that the CDC was hiring quarantine supervisors back mid-November and through mid-March, when they didn't really have any test plans set up. So how does that work if you're involved with quarantine supervision and all that, and you don't have any practical testing implement tools? Then what does that say for what you're planning to do, or what you're going to implement for a, there's just a big logical disconnect in that. There's been a lot of doctors who've been whistleblowing saying, they're reporting, the doctors are encouraged to report people who have COVID who die is dying from COVID, or the fact that with COVID. So if you die with COVID, does that mean you have COVID? But and this is the biggest, and I think the most interesting, in my opinion, profound part of the revelation is, if you look at the Hebrew word deber, Dalet Bet Resh, you have Deuteronomy, Devarim is the that's where we get that root. And so most frequently it's translated as speech, speech or speak, and then also whether we're talking it in a verb or a noun form, and then it's also used in a speak or speech, and also as thing, in a very generic sense as thing. But it's in a number of cases it's translated sometimes heavily as pestilence or plague. Okay, but you start looking at this and you say, all right, if they're saying that they're ascribing special meaning according to Nakud, I don't agree with the Nakud's importance in Revelation, and with that, I definitely have concerns about how the Strong's dictionaries, the lexicons are all parsed in this way, right? So the point of points here is anytime where you read the word plague or pestilence, it can be just as all the while as just referring to a thing or a word. And so if we have this as part of the divine words, like the blessings and curses at the back end of Deuteronomy, if you do this, then these things will come upon you. And one of them is basically fear. If you don't obey the Torah, you're going to be running when no one's chasing you. This is one of the things that this is one of the curses of disobedience is that just being gripped by fear. And so that's exactly what the nation is. They're gripped. They're afraid of words because it's not actual data and it's not actual danger. There's doctors. Thankfully, finally, more doctors are coming out and saying, hey, you don't quarantine healthy people, you quarantine sick people. I'm amazed it's taken them 2 months to buck the system and to challenge, Fauci and the CDC and the WHO who've overestimated the lethality and the contagious capabilities of this by a factor of 10 and 20. That to me is very, very disturbing. That makes me very mad. And if you look at what they did with such pretense and without data, it's like, okay, where's the data that you have that says that this is so much more dangerous than prior flus? The COVID virus, it's shown in the AMA dictionary in the 80s. It's like, hey, this is the common cold, and so we've got this strain of the common cold or even the flu it's so much more deadly than the other flus, and it still hasn't got the numbers. So even with trying to cheat the numbers, they still can't muster up anything that holds. And so, when people want to do social distancing and all that, it's just, to me, it's amazing. But it's really with the pattern to let my people go. Look at Netanyahu, basically told everyone to lock up. So was that a divine task or was that a Pharaoh-esque task? I'm uncertain on. The jury's still out in my mind on that. But it's interesting that Trump, on the last day of Passover this year, he said, that's when he said, okay, we're going to start reopening things. So that was kind of and a little bit of a pronouncement at the end of lockdown. I've also seen someone else, I don't know where they were putting this, but 40 days is kind of a period of testing. And we're coming up on day 40 is not too long where most of this is going to lift. Well, in Wisconsin, Tony Evers, this is my state. He's looking to push this out to the 26th of May. And I think these are all violations of the Constitution. So, the right to travel, the right to worship, the right to gather, the right to assemble, free speech, and all these things are being challenged. And I think that it's a matter of responsibility to stand in opposition of that which is contrary to the Constitution, contrary to the Torah. These people are taking oaths to uphold the Constitution, and then they're not. So there's legal basis for recall, etc. So I'm very I haven't had a current event thing that's irked me as much as this one, because it's just so predicated on so many lies. I'm so disgusted by it. But it really get into the tabernacle. So is this a tabernacle, a pre-tabernacle? Let my people go bit. So it wasn't long after Pharaoh started locking down where the people were liberated and they built the tabernacle. So on one hand, I'm very encouraged by this time in history, but it's equally frustrating. So.
Mm-hmm. Well, hey, brother, I appreciate you coming on to the show and for sharing your information with us, and I do hope that it spurns some interest out there and that people contact you and are willing to work with you to make this revelation more widespread, and that it becomes more commonplace than certainly what it is now, because it's again, share with people in the last few minutes why this is so relevant for their study.
Well, I'll start with the kind of the most simple and straightforward, because he said so, right? Thus saith the Lord. If thus saith the Lord doesn't mean anything, then it doesn't. But if it does, then we should really reconsider. So, did he recant? Okay, so between Torah and kosher and all these other things that in the feast that people are starting to return to, are saying, well, we gotta go back to this thing. Why is it the tabernacle is altogether excluded? How does that fit into your theology? Because I just don't see where it's like, well, they tried it once and it didn't. Well, they took it down and then they changed some stuff, and so it's more replacement theology. So. And then there's a matter of restoring, his name and his character. This is so important in the context of religious reform. Again, do you want to be known as worshiping an incompetent God? Because that's really what you're conceding to when you're saying, well, that shoebox is that's the best that divine inspiration could muster up. That's pathetic. So there's all sorts of parallels to this in the natural world, and the body being one of the more powerful ones, I think. Botany, but there's just a lot of different sides. Prophecy, if people are interested in prophecy, this is there are 144 pieces of silver that were fashioned to make this. What is that 144 in reference to? You just have so many different levels and layers. All of this has been hidden up until now. So, if the text is unimportant and all these events are unimportant, I guess it's the whole, everyone does church. They put a lot of time and effort into that, or synagogues or whatever. But he never said to build those. This is the only thing he said to build. And why is it then are we so ho-hum about it? I mean, even if it's built for purposes of tourism and learning, that's where I'd like to go with this, is to take this so you can get a structure up, you can take it to feasts, you can take it to conferences, and people can learn in it and from it, and to make a bigger kit like that, now we're talking probably several $100,000 at the starting point, and to make a full size is if you're making a silver or gold, that's 40 or 50 million. But hey, that's only a mega church. You have a lot of your your audience is maybe is left the conventional religion systems and everything, but it leaves everyone fragmented. So this has got the promise of restoring community, restoring revelation, getting people to to work together in ways more like what they did in ancient times. And again, this is the only "Thus saith the Lord" structure thing that was ever mandated to be built in all of biblical history, with the exception of Noah's Ark, where it says, "I'm not going to have a flood again." So, what do they got in Kentucky? They have a $100 million Ark exhibit for a boat that won't float and a flood that won't happen. So this is what the Christians have done this, but why is then this tabernacle unimportant? So in the scheme of it, I mean, this is a much more holy thing, in my opinion. So,
all right, brother. God bless all. We appreciate you. Have a good night,
Thanks
man.
for hosting.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us for this video and this broadcast. We appreciate all of you, and thank you for your patronage. Please do like and subscribe and share with your friends. God bless all of you in your seeking.